and His Knights by Elizabeth Lodor Merchant. King Arthur and the Castle Perilous. And when King Arthur awoke, he found himself in a dark prison, hearing about him many complaints of woeful knights. What are ye that so complain? Said King Arthur. We be here 20 knights, prisoners, said they, and some of us have lain here 7 year, and some more, and some less. After King Arthur and King Pellinore and Sir Gawain had followed the mysterious hunt into the enchanted forest, they never knew at what hour of the day or of the night either they might not hear the horns of fairyland blowing, and catch a glimpse of the long string of black hounds streaming through the meadow grasses after the beautiful white stag with the silver hoofs and the horns that were like the branches of trees. Many and wonderful were the adventures that befell them, and not only them, but all the other knights of the Round Table. Sometimes the fairy hunt led them into startling danger, sometimes into strange and beautiful places, but always they found there was a lady in distress to be rescued, a giant to be killed, a brave gentleman to be helped, or something else to be done that was included in the great vow. One day Arthur was hunting with his knights on the borders of the enchanted forest, following a big stag, which was not, however, the one with the fairy hooves that shone so brightly upon the moss. The king rode his horse far from his companions, and presently overtook the fine stag and shot it with a swift arrow from his bow. The stag fell by the side of a river, and Arthur dismounted to see if it were quite dead. As he stood there, the dim, thrilling noise of the elfin horns came to him, and in an instant, on the opposite side of the water, he caught a glimpse of the flying white deer of fairyland, and of the shadowy, speeding bodies of the coal-black hounds. Arthur's horse began to tremble. In another moment it had broken free. It was galloping home as fast as it could. It might well be frightened, for as the fairy hunt disappeared into the shadows, the entire forest grew as dark as midnight, while down the glimmering black waters of the river a little ship came sailing, with 100 torches burning in 100 silver holders, and lighting it from end to end. Nobody was steering or guiding the ship, but it sailed on as if a clever hand were at the helm, and when it reached the place where Arthur stood, it swung about on the water and lay rocking, as it were at anchor, close against the bank where the willows grew. Now here is my adventure, said King Arthur to himself, quite joyful and fearless, and filled with the thrill of high adventure. It is plain that this little ship, lit up with 100 torches, has come to take me somewhere. In his green hunting dress, he strode down through the willows and boarded the ship. Off it floated, again the moment that he was aboard, and when he looked up at the sails above his head, he saw that they were all made of white silk and embroidered. He saw that they were all made of white silk and embroidered with pink roses and poppies, the color of blood. So we can see represented 2 types of love, the emotional and the sensual love represented by that, or sometimes they're just flowers, right? The little ship went on down the river, and the flaming torches were mirrored in the dark, streamed like so many stars. The king seemed to be quite alone on board, when all at once, rising up as it seemed, from the water, 12 beautiful maidens appeared and made a ring about him, joining hands and dancing as gracefully as fairies dance on a moonlit night around anybody who is lucky enough to be able to see them. Then they all fell on their knees and said how glad they were that he had boarded the little ship, and what a delicious feast was spread for him if he would go below. So below King Arthur went, and found a cabin hung with white satin. Silver candlesticks with clear burning candles were set on a table, spread with fruit and honey. white bread, and red wine. Oh, the fruit and honey is definitely a good meal. He sat down to eat, and the 12 beautiful maidens waited on him. When he had finished, they led him to a room hung with crimson satin, and he laid down on a blue and silver bed and fell asleep. But when he awoke, the beautiful ship and the blue and silver bed and the crimson satin of the hangings had all disappeared. He found himself in a dark dungeon, lying on a stone floor with 20 other knights, who were all groaning in the deepest trouble, and asking one another if nobody would ever come to help them. Now, far more than execution, the process of prison has been implemented as sort of a dehumanization and a cruel and unusual punishment. While you're awaiting trial and getting right to it, those very days, that's different, but it's long been the case that prison did not operate that way. King Arthur sat up and rubbed his eyes. "Where am I?" he asked the knights in astonishment. "And who are all of you?" "Alas, alas," cried all the 20 together. "We are 20 prisoners, and we have been thrown into this dungeon by the cruel lord of the castle. And here he will keep us until we die of hunger, and as many have died before us, for we can only be rescued when a knight has been found who is brave enough and strong enough to fight with the lord of the castle and to conquer him. And nobody is ever likely to do." So 20 they were, 20 confirmed. This is going up in 2020. "But indeed there is now a knight among you who is quite brave enough and strong enough to try," cried King Arthur. "Here is the adventure to which I have been brought by a little ship with silken sails and 12 dancing fairies aboard. Tell me how to get out of this dungeon, and I will soon challenge the lord of the castle to fight." Even as he said the words, a light seemed to appear from nowhere, and he saw a beautiful girl dressed like a princess standing beside him with a gleaming silver lamp in her slender hand. "Follow me," said the maiden. "I am the princess of this castle, and I will do everything in my power to help to save these poor prisoners." Immediately, King Arthur sprang to his feet and followed her, eager to help set free the suffering prisoners. She led him out of the dungeon, and each of the 20 knights rose to his feet and followed. As soon as the fair lady had unlocked and opened the door, she took them all to the hall of the castle and gave King Arthur armor to wear over his green hunting clothes. I like to combine reds and greens in that case, but she pointed to a warhorse that stood champing its bit in the courtyard outside. "Mount the horse," said she. "Take your sword, your shield, and your spear. The lord of the castle is in the meadow on his great black steed, waiting for someone to do battle with him for his prisoners. Every morning he waits, trotting up and down, but no antagonist ever come. They know too well how very small is the chance they have against him." Arthur was already dressed in the bright armor. He had taken up his shield and spear, but when he looked at the sword, he shook his head. "I cannot fight with that sword," he cried. "Alas, alas, where is my magic sword, Excalibur?" Then the beautiful lady laughed, put her hand behind her, and brought forth what looked like Arthur's own sword, Excalibur, and the king with great joy took it into his hand and set off for the meadow with all the 20 knights, pale and thin and trembling between hope and fear, walking 2 and 2 behind him. This was indeed a great adventure, much greater than King Arthur expected, for the ship was a witch's ship, and the 12 dancing fairies were wicked fairies, and the lady who called herself the princess of the castle Perilous was the wickedest fairy of them all, because you must know Morgane la Fille, Arthur's sister, had made herself queen of the water witches, and she wished her brother, the king, to be killed. So she had set all this magic afoot, and had also stolen Arthur's real sword, Excalibur, and given it to the knight, who was waiting for the king in the meadows, prancing up and down over the daisies, on the great strong horse. When he saw Arthur coming, he rode towards him with a great shout, waving the stolen Excalibur around and around his head. The king spurred his own horse forward, and the two met with the ringing clash of steel. Over and over again they struck at each other, but King Arthur felt with anguish that his own sword was not striking keen and true. Then, even in the thick of the battle, he found time to gaze at the beautiful jewels and the scabbard of the sword that his enemy used so cleverly and well, and instantly the queen guessed that some terrible treachery was at work, and that the other knight was fighting with the true Excalibur, and that the sword in his own hands was not even made of fighting steel. As Arthur realized this, he wavered in his saddle and almost fell. The wicked lord who fought him swung Excalibur high to strike the last blow, but at that very moment the waters of the river which flowed round the meadow were suddenly and strangely disturbed. Out of the sparkling foam sprang a figure, no less sparkling, and across the grass swept a beautiful lady with dripping golden hair and a long silver gown trailing yards behind her. It was the water fairy who had brought up Sir Lancelot. She had heard from the moor hens and little fishes of the plot made by Morgane la Fille, and was hurrying as fast as she could to the rescue. She swept past the 20 pale knights and stood poised on her little white feet just above the grass, half resting on the meadow flowers, and half hanging on her misty wings in the air. She waved her white hands and cried out magical words in a voice that was as clear and musical as the babbling of the brook, and the wicked lord on the big horse dropped Excalibur almost into Arthur's very hands. The king seized his own good sword again by its jeweled hilt, and with a shout of victory stabbed his enemy through the breast. The big knight fell heavily to the ground and lay there, very, very sorely hurt. Well, I don't know how anybody could be stabbed in the chest and not be sorely, sorely hurt. His servants came running from the castle and carried him in. He got the better in the end, but nobody cared much about that. What everybody did care about was that the 20 imprisoned knights were set free and went joyfully home to their 20 faithful wives. The Lady of the Lake slid back into her shining, babbling river. Arthur, carrying Excalibur, galloped off to Camelot. And as for the 12 wicked fairies, and the 13th, who was the wickedest of all, no doubt they went on dancing forever on the little ship with the 100 torches and the embroidered silken sails. They were only water fairies, you see, and they had done what the queen of the water witches had ordered them to do. And after all, it had been a right and noble and fine adventure for King Arthur, and as he had come out of it victorious, he had no reason to complain. Now, one of the things that we can learn from this story is that the positive and the pleasurable and the joyous, it's not always right. And sometimes it's the negative and the unenjoyable that is the right thing. So evil, righteousness aren't decided in polar terms like that so much.